Amina had always walked softly through life, her presence more breeze than storm. In the quiet corners of the village, she wove baskets with fingers that moved like whispered wind, always alert, always listening. She did not speak unless spoken to, not because she lacked words, but because she knew that in her world, silence was safer. Her mother had died before she was old enough to know the shape of her face, and her father had followed soon after. Since then she'd lived under the roof of her uncle and stepmother, two people who wore smiles like masks carved from stone. They never beat her. They never screamed. But they left her out of family gatherings, fed her after everyone else, and looked through her as if she were smoke. Amina had learned how to live by staying small, by slipping between shadows, by never asking why the warmth of a home never reached her. So when they told her it was time for the ritual of returning, she believed it without question. Every generation, one girl must journey into the forest on the eve of her 17th year, they said, to offer herself to the spirits for the sake of village harvests and peace. A sacred act. A high honor. They dressed her in a white shift and braided her hair with river reeds, telling her she was chosen, just like her grandmother before her. But no one ever spoke of what happened to her grandmother afterward. They gave her a flask of water and a lump of bread and kissed her brow with lips as cold as clay. They led her to the edge of the forest at dusk, to a place where the trees grew like teeth from the ground and the wind made a sound like mourning. Her uncle placed a hand on her shoulder, heavy with false pride, and whispered, "Do not look back." Then they left her. The forest swallowed her. Amina stood at the edge for a long time. The trees in front of her were thick, unnaturally so, as if they leaned inward to watch her. A path wound between them, narrow and overgrown. She took her first step in with a heart that beat like a trapped bird's. Her feet, bare and pale against the mossy floor, trembled with each step. Behind her, the world she knew fell away like a dream at waking. There were no stars above the canopy. The light vanished as quickly as the warmth. The deeper she walked, the more the forest changed. Vines hung like curtains. Roots slithered across the ground like sleeping serpents. The air turned thick, humid, full of a silence so complete it screamed. Every step she took felt like a trespass. An hour passed. Or maybe more. Her legs ached. Her breath came short. The bread was gone, the water only a drop remaining. Then she tripped on a knot of roots and fell hard, her knee tearing open against a stone. Pain flared white in her vision and she cried out, but the trees did not echo her. They listened. She curled into herself on the cold ground, arms around her ribs, dirt clinging to her skin. 1,000 questions swam in her mind, but none more pressing than the one that stabbed at her over and over. Why? Why had they done this? Why her? Why now? But the forest did not answer with words. Instead, something else drifted through the air, a sound so soft it barely existed. A tune, gentle and familiar, floating like fog. A lullaby. She didn't know the words, but the melody scratched at something old inside her, something buried and half forgotten. It was not a song her stepmother had ever sung. It was not a tune she'd heard in the village square. Yet it pulsed through her like a heartbeat she'd lost in the womb. Amina pushed herself to her feet, blood trailing down her leg, hand gripping a nearby tree for support. She turned in a slow circle. The song was everywhere, and nowhere. It came from behind one tree, then another, then from above, as if the branches themselves were humming. The sound was beautiful but not comforting. It carried sorrow in every note. And hunger. Her breath came faster, but she couldn't stop listening. It drew her forward, deeper into the darkness, through tangled roots and curtains of moss. The forest seemed to lean closer with every step, eager, breathless. Then she stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight, where had it come from? Bathed the space in silver. A circle of stones stood in the middle, arranged like a crown upon the earth. The grass inside the ring was yellowed, dry, as if scorched by a fire that hadn't burned in years. And there, just beyond the ring's edge, stood a tree larger than any she'd seen. Its trunk was wide enough to cradle a house. Its bark was gnarled like a face twisted in grief. And carved into that bark, faint and glowing faintly blue, were symbols she couldn't read, but her soul recognized them. The lullaby grew louder. Amina stepped forward, drawn by the ache in her chest, the sense that something she'd lost long ago lived in that clearing. But just before her foot crossed into the stone circle, the lullaby stopped. The silence hit like a slap. Then the forest groaned. It came from everywhere, the sound of wood twisting, of vines snapping, of the ground heaving beneath her. Amina stumbled back, gasping. The tree's bark shimmered and the symbols began to weep light, like tears. Or blood. Or both. She didn't know if she was awake or dreaming anymore. Her hand pressed to her chest and she felt her heart racing. That's when she noticed the back of her hand. A mark had appeared. Faint, blue and shaped like a single teardrop. The lullaby returned, but now it was coming from inside her. Not from her mouth. Not from her ears. But from somewhere deeper, like it had always lived beneath her skin, waiting. She didn't know the words, but she could hum the melody now, and the forest listened. Amina stood alone, terrified and bloodied, but something had shifted. She wasn't just prey anymore. She was a thread tied to something ancient and unfinished. And the forest wasn't just a tomb. It was waiting for a story to begin again. Prince Tano was not the kind of royal bards sang of with fire and fury. His name was not written into war songs or etched into steel. His sword, though sharp, had rarely tasted blood. And his crown, though gold, often sat untouched on the carved throne in the palace hall. Tano was a prince of stillness, of shadowed balconies, old books, and drifting melodies that danced through his memory like ghosts. He was the second son, and many thought of him as the spare, useful only if fate twisted cruelly. Yet those who truly looked saw a man woven of mystery and silence, a soul that did not hunger for conquest, but for something far older, far sadder. His mother, Queen Salama, had died when he was only 6 years old. They told him she slipped in the bath, that her head struck the marble edge, that her final breath left her body before anyone reached her. He remembered none of that. What he remembered was her voice, singing to him in a garden where the white flowers only opened at dusk. A song that drifted into his dreams even now, decades later. The lullaby had no name. No one in the court knew of it. The servants, the nurses, even his elder brother, none had heard it before or since. He had tried once to hum it to the court minstrel, hoping it was some hidden ballad, some noble tune of old. But the man only looked at him kindly, then shook his head. "You must have dreamed it, Highness," he'd said. "A child's imagination." But it hadn't been a dream. Even now, Tano could feel it humming under his skin. A haunting tune, made of rain and sorrow, of soft hands brushing hair away from a young boy's face. And for years, that song had been the only thing in the world he wanted to understand. It was the tether to the only warmth he had ever known. Because after Queen Salama died, the palace had changed. The warmth left its halls. His father remarried swiftly to a cold-faced noblewoman who spoke with clipped words and moved with calculated grace. She bore no children. She took no interest in Tano. And Tano? He retreated. Into the music, into the garden, into the song. As he grew, he studied not just the lute and flute but the history of sound. He traveled to neighboring kingdoms under the guise of diplomacy but always asked the musicians and old crones about lost lullabies, ancient harmonies, tribal chants. No one had ever heard his melody. And then one evening it found him again. He was riding alone near the borderlands, a stretch of forbidden forest that was seldom approached, let alone entered. Even the guards stayed back, whispering of old curses, of voices that called from the trees. The forest was thick and dark, a place where light died before it touched the ground. It was said that people who entered never returned. But on that night, something strange pulled him close. He had stopped to rest, his horse grazing on a patch of dew-soaked grass. The sun had just begun to fall, and the shadows of the trees stretched long and thin, fingers reaching toward him. Tano dismounted, his boots crunching softly on leaves. He walked forward, not quite entering the treeline, but close enough that he could smell the earth, rich and old like memory. And then, faint as breath on glass, he heard it. The lullaby. Not imagined. Not remembered. Real. Floating through the trees like a sigh, the tune danced just beyond his reach. He froze, every hair on his arm standing straight, his mouth parting in disbelief. The song curled around the trees, brushing his skin, echoing in his bones. He stepped closer trying to catch it, only for it to vanish again. But it had been there. For the first time since he was a child, Tano felt a heartbeat that wasn't entirely his own. The past had stirred. Something long buried had whispered its name. That night he returned to the palace but sleep never came. He walked the halls like a ghost himself, his fingers twitching with the notes, replaying them on an imaginary lute. By morning he had made his decision. He had to return. He told no one. Not his tutors, not the steward, not even his brother. The forest was forbidden by royal decree, a law passed generations ago after too many disappearances. Entering it would not only be dangerous, it could be seen as a betrayal of the crown. But Tano had long stopped fearing consequences. What he feared was silence. The silence of not knowing. 2 days later, cloaked in a traveler's robe and riding a plain brown mare, He slipped out through the western gate and made his way back to the forest. This time he brought his loot. As he neared the edge again, he dismounted and pressed his palm to the bark of a towering ash tree. "I don't know what you are," he murmured to the forest, "but I know you remember her." Then he began to play. He didn't know what he expected. An answer? A ghost? The wind howled through the branches, but no melody returned. Still he played on, the song shaping itself without conscious thought, each note calling something deeper, something sleeping. Then, movement. A flicker of white between the trees. He froze. At first he thought it was a trick of the light. But then it moved again. A girl. Young. Barefoot. Pale dress trailing like mist. She didn't speak. She didn't look directly at him. But she was humming. Humming his song. Tano stood slowly, the lute slipping from his hands. "Wait," he called. She turned her head slightly. Her eyes met his, and in that instant, something impossible passed between them. Recognition. Not of the face but of the soul. Then she turned and ran into the forest. Tano chased without thinking. He barely felt the branches slicing at his arms, the roots clawing at his boots. The forest swallowed him whole, but the song guided him just ahead, like a trail of stardust. He lost her near a clearing ringed by stones. The moonlight spilled down here and something ancient hung in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. But the girl was gone. Tano stood in the center of the ring, chest heaving, heart echoing like a drum. And there in the quiet he began to hum the lullaby once more. A breeze picked up. The trees shivered. And the forest hummed back. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Something had changed. Something had awakened. The melody was not his alone. It belonged to this place. It belonged to her. And somehow he knew, the answers he had chased his whole life waited within the roots and rivers of this cursed forest. And the girl with the voice of his past was not dead, not spirit, but alive. Wounded. Alone. And perhaps, just like him, she was searching for something that had been stolen long ago. Amina had stopped counting the days since she was left to die. Time didn't move normally here. In the world beyond the forest, she had measured life in sunrises and family chores, in footsteps between the village and the river, in how long it took for her stepmother's voice to shift from cold indifference to seething cruelty. But in the forest there was no such rhythm. The sun filtered through in ribbons, strange and twisted, and shadows changed places without reason. Sometimes night fell twice in a single day. Sometimes it didn't come at all. She survived off instinct. Off the sharp edge of desperation. Roots tasted bitter but didn't kill her. Rainwater caught in leaves kept her throat from cracking. She learned to move quietly, slowly. She listened more than she walked. Because the forest breathed. It wasn't a place. It was a presence. Every time she blinked, the trees seemed to shift. Once, she was sure a thick old oak had been 10 paces behind her, and in the next breath, it loomed ahead. The path she followed would vanish, only to appear again when she circled back. The forest did not want her dead, but it didn't want her to forget she was trespassing. And still she stayed alive. It wasn't just the survival of her body, it was something deeper, something stitched to the sound she kept hearing. That lullaby. Sometimes she heard it faintly, humming through branches, barely above the wind. Other times it rang clear as crystal, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. The melody became her tether, her guide. When the fear grew too great, when the chill of night gnawed at her bones and the hunger turned her belly inside out, the song brought her back from the edge. She found the stone circle by accident, or perhaps it found her. It was nestled in a hollow between 3 great trees with roots like arms, arching above the moss. 12 stones, all the same size, curved into a perfect ring. Each was covered in carvings that made her skin itch to look at, symbols too ancient for memory. The moment she stepped inside the ring, the air changed. Thicker. Warmer. The song was loudest here. Clear. Like someone standing right behind her, humming into her ear. That first night, she collapsed in the center of the circle and didn't move. Her body ached in every place she could name and in some she couldn't. She wept silently, cheeks pressed to the moss. But even as her tears soaked the ground, the song rocked her into sleep. And that's when the visions began. She dreamed of a woman in blue robes, tall and calm, with a face both kind and unknowable. Her eyes were too wide, too deep, like looking into the surface of a still lake just before it ripples. She didn't speak, not with words, but the song came from her. Amina saw her walking barefoot through the same forest, singing to the trees. In some dreams she stood at the center of a flood. In others she held a baby close, the song turning into a whisper, then a spell. Amina awoke from those dreams with tears she didn't understand and a feeling like something old had brushed against her soul. She knew nothing of the woman. But the melody in her voice wrapped around Amina's chest like a ribbon and pulled. Days passed. Or maybe weeks. She began to explore outside the ring. Not far, just enough to gather roots, berries, moss for bedding. But the forest did not like her leaving. Each time it turned strange. Once, the trees all leaned slightly toward her, no matter where she turned. Another time, she walked for hours only to find herself stepping right back into the stone circle as if the forest had folded in on itself. The fear came in waves. It whispered her name. It showed her illusions. She saw her stepmother once, walking through the trees, calling sweetly, arms open. Amina ran toward her, only to crash into a thorn bush and cut her face. Another time she heard her uncle's voice, promising forgiveness, begging her to return. But she had learned to listen closely. The voices didn't carry breath. They were empty, hollow, like bones clicking together in the dark. Still, even in the deepest fear, the song remained. It never lied. It never wavered. And Amina followed it. She began to understand the forest in strange ways. She knew when it was listening. She knew which stones to press her back against when she needed warmth. She learned not to drink from the stream that glowed blue at night. She began to hear whispers that weren't words, just impressions, old stories etched into the trees, passed down in rustling leaves. Once, the song drew her to a clearing where mushrooms formed a perfect spiral. She stepped into it and saw herself, small and young, dancing with her mother in their old hut, laughter thick in the air. She wept then because the memory had been buried so deep it had almost died. The forest was not only testing her. It was remembering her. It wanted to know if she would break. If the betrayal of family, the cruelty of blood, would rot her spirit. And each time she bent beneath the weight of it, she stood again. One night, thunder cracked open the sky and rain fell like fists. Amina huddled in the stone circle, shivering, soaked. She whispered to the forest, to the song, to the woman in her dreams. She didn't know what she was saying, just prayers made of breath and desperation. And in the middle of the storm the song returned, not soft but bold. Louder than ever before. It came from the ground, from the trees, from the rain itself. She sang back. Her voice was raw, untrained, but true. And something deep beneath the moss and roots stirred in response. The forest didn't answer with words, but with memory. The next day she walked to the edge of the circle and saw carvings in the trees she hadn't noticed before. Spirals. A woman's silhouette. They pulsed with light when she touched them. She wasn't just surviving now, she was being changed. Her bones knew things they hadn't before. She could feel when something was watching. She could taste danger in the wind. And her heart, once quiet with fear, began to fill with something else. Hope. Because she began to believe that she wasn't cursed. She wasn't forgotten. She was part of a song older than pain. One morning, she awoke to find a single golden feather lying in the circle's center. She touched it and images flashed, of a young boy with a crown too big for his head, laughing as a woman sang to him. The boy's eyes held the same ache Amina felt when she sang. She didn't know who he was. But she knew the forest did. She stood slowly, fingers tightening around the feather. In the forest where I was meant to die, she whispered, I will not vanish. She looked up at the canopy above, where the light danced in odd spirals and the air shimmered like breath on glass. I will remember. The wind answered in the melody. And that night, for the first time, the woman in blue robes smiled at her in the dream. Her mouth moved. No sound came, but Amina knew what she had said. You are the note the kingdom forgot. But now they will hear you. The next day she walked farther than she ever had. The trees moved for her this time. And deep in her chest, a warmth stirred. She was not alone. She never had been. In the forest where she was meant to die, she helped the kingdom remember how to live. Tano had grown tired of silence. Not the quiet that came from empty halls or vacant gardens, but the kind that sank into bones, the kind that weighed down the heart without making a sound. It had lived with him since the day his mother vanished. A single note in a lullaby, sharp, aching, unfinished, had haunted his dreams since boyhood. His tutors, guards, and even the court priest had all failed to explain why he remembered something no one else did. But memory was stubborn, and so was longing. He had searched for the melody in songs of every kingdom, in the notes of every bard who passed through the palace gates. Nothing ever matched. Until a week ago. He'd been riding alone near the edge of the forbidden forest, something he was forbidden to do but often did regardless, when a soft hum had drifted past him like a breeze. He had frozen in the saddle, heart slamming against his ribs. For one impossible moment, the air had carried that same ancient tune. The same notes that used to lull him to sleep. The same cadence that his mother's lips used to whisper against his ear. It was gone as quickly as it came. But it was enough. The forest was dangerous. He knew the tales, of hunters never returning, of strange lights, of voices that mimicked loved ones and led men to madness. But none of that frightened him more than the possibility of forgetting her song forever. So he entered the woods. No guards. No servants. No warnings. He didn't even leave a message behind. The forest didn't greet him, it watched. It didn't roar, didn't howl, but it felt alive, as though each step he took was being recorded in the breath of the leaves. He walked cautiously at first, blade at his hip, hand on the hilt. But after an hour he realized that weapons meant little here. This place was not made for steel. It was made for something older. For stories. For echoes. For memory. And that's when he heard it again. The melody. Faint. Floating. Drawing him deeper. He followed the sound like a starving man following the smell of fire-roasted bread. Past twisted trees, over streams that shimmered with unnatural light, through thickets that parted just as he approached. He had no sense of time. The sun above was unreliable, flickering between dusk and dawn with no logic. But the song remained steady, a thread weaving through the maze. Eventually it led him to a clearing. A circle of stones sat at its center, ancient and deliberate. And lying within the ring, curled like a wounded animal, was a girl. At first he thought she might be dead. Her skin looked too pale. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her hands were bruised, her hair tangled with leaves and dust. But then her lips moved. And she hummed. Not loudly. Not with strength. But clearly. Was the song. His song. The one only he remembered. He knelt beside her, afraid to breathe too hard, afraid the moment would break. The closer he got, the clearer the melody became, as if the forest itself was amplifying it for his ears alone. Oh, who was she? He reached out slowly, brushing a leaf from her cheek. Her skin was warm, too warm. Feverish. She stirred slightly at his touch but didn't wake. Her fingers twitched against the moss. The song faltered for a moment, then returned even softer. Tano's chest ached. This wasn't a chance meeting. This wasn't coincidence. He felt it in the marrow of his bones. Something was being answered. A question his soul had asked long ago was finally whispering its reply. But what was she doing here? Alone? Injured? He didn't know whether to carry her or stay. So he stayed. He made a small fire with careful hands, careful not to disturb the stones. He fetched water from a stream he passed earlier, watching it closely for signs of magic. He didn't speak. The forest didn't want words. That night he sat by the fire and watched her breathe. In her sleep, her brow furrowed. She murmured things he couldn't understand, fragments of dreams or memories. And always, beneath it, the song continued. He didn't sleep that night. He just listened. At dawn, if it could be called that, she stirred more violently. Her fingers clenched in the moss. Her eyes fluttered open. They locked eyes. She flinched first, drawing back, curling tighter as if expecting a blow. Tano raised both hands, palms open. I won't hurt you, he said gently. She blinked at him, not trusting the words. Not yet. How long have you been here? He tried again, his voice a soft breeze. Amina's voice came out as a rasp. Too long. Tano nodded slowly. I'm Tano. She didn't respond with a name. That song, he said. Where did you learn it? She frowned. I didn't. It found me. His breath caught. Me too. There was silence between them then. But it wasn't empty. It was full of caution, of curiosity, of something just beginning to stir between two souls shaped by the same melody. You're not from here, she said finally. I'm from the palace, he replied. The capital. She studied him. Not his clothes or face, but his presence. You don't smell like a prince. He laughed quietly. Good. She wasn't sure why she didn't run. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with pity but recognition. As if they'd met before long ago in another life. As if they were both chasing the same ghost. She reached for water. Her hands shook. He handed her the cup without a word. After drinking, she sighed. The forest doesn't want me dead anymore. I think it's waiting. For what? He asked. I don't know, she said. You maybe. He looked down. I don't even know why I came. She raised an eyebrow. Yes, you do. He hesitated. The song. They sat in silence again. The forest watched. After a while she tried to stand. Her legs failed her. He caught her before she fell, his hands gentle but steady. She didn't pull away immediately. She felt the same odd current that ran through the air, the same hum in his touch that she'd felt in the stones, the dreams, the visions. They were connected. Not by fate. By memory. "Did someone leave you here?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "My stepmother. My uncle. Said it was tradition." His fists clenched. "That's not tradition. That's cruelty." "It doesn't matter now," she murmured. "The forest has its own way." Tano helped her back down, carefully lowering her onto the moss. "What do we do now?" She stared up at the trees. "We wait. For the next part of the story." He sat beside her again, unsure if he should hold her hand, but feeling that to do so would be too much too soon. Still, he didn't want to leave. And she, though wary, didn't ask him to. The forest didn't reject him. That was sign enough. All around them, the leaves rustled like whispers. The stones pulsed faintly like heartbeats. The song lingered in the air, weaving its threads between their breaths. Whatever this was, whatever force had led him here and kept her alive, was not finished yet. So they stayed. They watched. They listened. And in the silence between them, something deeper began to grow. Not quite love. Not yet. But something older than that. Something born of melody and memory. Something that no prince or cursed girl could walk away from. Not now. Not ever. They didn't speak much the next morning. The forest didn't like chatter, and neither of them had the strength to force it. Instead, they moved carefully around one another, Tano gathering berries he somehow knew were safe, Amina sitting in the morning mist with her eyes closed, as though she were listening for something deeper than birdsong. There was a rhythm now between them. A cautious dance. He made the fire. She tended the wounds on her legs with herbs he'd found but didn't recognize. She didn't ask how he knew they would help. He didn't ask how she knew to use them. The forest, it seemed, had offered both of them pieces of forgotten knowledge, as if weaving them into something greater than they were before. Only later, as they sat close to the flames, Amina wrapped in the blanket he had brought, Tano still fiddling with the carved wood of his flute, did the silence break. "You said your mother sang it to you?" she asked, voice hoarse but stronger now. He nodded. "Before she died. I was 5. Maybe 6. Amina's eyes flickered. "Do you remember her?" "Barely." He looked down at the flute. She had silver bracelets. Always jingling. And when she sang that song, the world stopped hurting. Amina listened. She didn't rush him, didn't fill the space with pity or questions. She knew what it felt like to lose something without knowing why. "I never knew my real mother," she said after a pause. "My stepmother came when I was little. Said she'd keep me safe. But she always looked at me like I was wrong." Tano looked up. "She left you in this forest. Betrayed me," Amina said, nodding. "Told me it was a village ritual to keep the spirits satisfied. My uncle carried me into the trees at dusk. Said I was lucky to be chosen. And you believed them?" For a moment. She looked into the flames. "Then I heard the song. In the darkness. And I knew they lied." They sat in silence again. Then, slowly, as though compelled by something beneath thought, Amina began to hum. Tano closed his eyes. The tune rose between them like smoke, familiar and foreign all at once. Without speaking, he lifted the flute and joined her, the soft notes blending into her voice. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And as the harmony formed, the trees shuddered. Branches bent with a creak like old bones stretching. Leaves rustled, but there was no wind. The underbrush trembled, and in front of them, the dense thickets that had closed their clearing slowly parted. A path. They both stared at it. "You saw that?" Tano asked, voice low. Amina nodded slowly. "It responded. To the song? To us singing it together." He looked at her and she met his gaze. "Why would it do that?" he whispered. "Because we're not just people," Amina said. "We're parts of something else." They didn't walk the path right away. Instead, they sat by the fire, questions flickering in their minds like sparks. "How did you survive alone?" Tano asked after some time. "Before I found you?" "The forest helped me," she said. "It's cruel when it wants to be. But not always. I saw visions of a woman in blue robes." She didn't speak. Just hummed that song. "She showed me the stones, taught me which plants were safe." He frowned. "My mother wore blue robes." She paused. "You said she died." "She did. But no one found a body. Only the robe." Amina's fingers tightened around her knees. "Do you think?" "I don't know," he said. "But I've heard her voice every time the melody appears." Amina drew her knees to her chest. "I thought I was cursed. Left here to be taken by spirits. But maybe this was something else. Not a punishment, he said. A calling. They both turned to look at the path again. The forest waited, silent, patient, listening. Do you ever feel like we knew each other before? Amina asked suddenly. Tano blinked. Yes. She gave a small, fragile smile. Me too. He leaned forward. The song, how did it find you? In a dream, she said. The first night they left me here. I woke up humming it. Same, he whispered. The night my mother disappeared. They stared at each other as if trying to read lines written behind the other's eyes. It's not just a song, Tano said. It's a memory. Or a message, Amina added. He looked again at the flute in his lap. When I play it, I see things. Her brow furrowed. Like visions? Pieces. A woman crying. A door closing. A man in royal armor walking into a fire. Amina's breath caught. I've seen that fire. His head snapped up. Where? In a dream, she said. It was in the forest. The woman in blue tried to stop him. But he didn't turn around. Tano stood slowly pacing. My father, he never speaks of her death. Never once. All he says is, she's gone. Let her be gone. That sounds like guilt, Amina said. He looked at her sharply. You think he? I don't know. But maybe the forest does. They let the fire die out before moving. They took only what they needed. The path was narrow and curved like a question. The trees on either side loomed like ancient judges. They walked in silence, their footsteps barely touching the moss. After an hour, the path ended in another clearing, this one shaped like a spiral with carved stones rising like teeth from the earth. At the center sat a pool of still water. Amina approached first, drawn as if by instinct. She knelt and looked into the pool. I see, she whispered. Tano stepped beside her. A castle. The image in the water showed a younger version of Tano, sitting on a balcony, legs dangling, crying. A woman in blue approached him, knelt, and wrapped him in her arms. She was real, Amina said. Tano watched, frozen. That's her. The image shifted, now showing a man in red and gold, standing over the same woman, shouting. She backed away, holding something in her arms. Baby. Tano's breath caught. That's me. The man slapped the woman. She fell. The baby cried. The image vanished. Tano dropped to his knees. He lied. All these years. Amina touched his shoulder gently. He said she drowned. Said she disappeared. She didn't, Amina said. He sent her away. The pool shimmered again. This time Amina saw herself, left in the woods, tied to a tree. Her stepmother walking away without a second glance. But behind them, hidden in the forest, stood the woman in blue. Watching. She was there when I was abandoned, Amina breathed. She followed me. She's been guiding us both, Tano said. Amina turned to him. We're connected through her. Through the song. He looked at her, then really looked. And she wasn't just a girl who survived the forest. She was a key, a living thread tied to his lost mother, to the melody that haunted him. The forest hadn't just saved her. It had chosen her. We need to keep singing, he said. Together. They sat beside the pool, and this time when they sang, the forest bloomed. Trees brightened. Flowers glowed. The pool shimmered with starlight. And overhead, a voice, not theirs, joined the melody. Amina's hand found his. We're not alone anymore, she whispered. No, he said. We never were. And for the first time since he was a boy, Tano felt whole. Not because he had answers, but because he had found someone who carried the same questions. Together, they would follow the song into whatever truth waited ahead. They pressed on deeper into the forest, the spiral pool behind them fading as the trees leaned in tighter. The melody hummed faintly, guiding them, though neither knew exactly where they were heading. The forest no longer felt hostile. It felt expectant. Like the pages of an unread story rustling in a breeze. Amina's legs still throbbed from old wounds, but she walked sturdily beside Tano. They moved slowly, taking turns carrying the small pouch of herbs and the flute, sharing water from a carved wooden canteen. The bond they had begun to form pulsed between them, a fragile cord of trust, discovery, companionship. They reached a glade where the light shifted unexpectedly. The trees parted overhead, revealing a sky that shimmered with blues and golds. Streamers of light fell like rain through the branches, illuminating a figure standing just beyond the trees, so human and yet so much more. Her hair was the color of moonlight, her robes flowed like water, false steps never touching the ground. She watched them with eyes that brimmed with tears. Tano froze. Amina gasped. They stared at her, uncertain if she was real or dream, ghost or goddess. The melody rose in the air, echoing from their hearts before their lips could shape it. As if the forest recognized her too. Tano felt his chest tighten. He'd never seen his mother. He thought he remembered her voice through the lullaby. He thought he remembered, but she had died before he truly knew her. Yet now before him stood a presence that felt like first breath, first grief, first love. The tears she wept glowed like starlight against her cheeks. Amina reached for Tano's hand. The spirit, the queen in the trees, stepped forward, her presence shifting the air, bending the leaves. They felt the symphony of nature hush, waiting. The queen raised a hand toward them. "My children," she said, voice both echo and whisper. Tano's breath caught in his throat. Amina swallowed. Her heart pounded in sudden fear. The lullaby she'd sung, a connection she didn't understand, a bond she'd followed, now pulsed inside her chest. She felt changed. "I was betrayed," the queen continued. "By my husband, by blood I trusted. The blood of Amina's family." Amina froze, face pale. She squeezed Tano's hand tightly. The queen's tears dripped golden on the forest floor, blooming into tiny flowers of light where they landed. "They feared my power," she said, "and the love I bore for my son. They silenced me. They turned the forest against me. I was drowned, in life but not in spirit." Tano's vision blurred. His knees weakened. "It was my lullaby," she said, voice breaking. "A lullaby woven with protection, but also truth. I cast it over my son so his soul would remember. But I never finished it. I didn't have the strength or the chance. I could not root it deep enough to untangle the darkness. I could only give it a spark." Tano trembled. "I remember," he whispered. "It has haunted me." The queen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again she looked at Amina. "You are the one I found in the forest," she said. "I saw your heart. Pure. Unbroken. You have no royal blood, but purity is stronger than pedigree." Amina shook her head. "I'm no one. My bloodline tried to destroy you," the queen said softly. "But they failed. And in their failing they awakened the forest, and me, to set things right." She lifted her robe slightly, revealing the same teardrop symbol carved into her wrist. Silver light pulsed beneath her skin. "The lullaby needs a true heart to finish it, to root it in love, to spread protection. That heart is yours." Amina stared at her wrist. Her own wrist itched as though burning. She looked down, no tattoo, no bloodline visible. But in her mind, the melody thrummed with sudden clarity. She recognized each turn, each note. "I don't know how," she whispered, voice small. "The melody is not just song," the queen said. "It is protection and memory. Each note holds a stitch in the fabric of life. A truth, a spell, a promise. But it must be sung completely, with intention, by the heart who truly believes." Amina felt tears gather as emotions she'd buried rose, joy, sorrow, grief, wonder. "If I fail?" she asked. The queen's face glowed. "If you fail, the darkness will reawaken. The betrayal will spread once more. The forest will close. The melody will fade." She turned to Tano. "But if she does not, the truth will shine. The curse will break. The kingdom will heal." Tano bowed his head. "I will protect her. With my life." The queen's eyes softened. "You already have." She held her arms wide. Between her palms glimmered the image of Amina and Tano, standing in a burst of silver. The lullaby floated around them like wind through chimes. Then she sang. It wasn't loud or musical. It was breath. It was bone. It was the melody without words. But inside Amina, each note glowed like light on water. She breathed in deeply, her heartbeat steady as a drum. After the vision ended, the forest sighed. The leaves rustled in tears of rain, gentle and soft. The queen faded, her robes folding into mist, her tears falling to feed the earth. "Finish it," she whispered. "For all of us." Amina and Tano stood in silence. The forest reactivated. Every branch, every breeze, every stone pulsed with life again. Amina cradled the feeling in her chest as though it were a fragile flame. Tano placed his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. They understood. This forest, this song, this destiny, it was bigger than either of them. It was the legacy of love and betrayal, of truth and remembrance. And they would finish it. Wordless they walked side by side from the glade. The path opened for them as before, but this time it hummed with new purpose. Fast, urgent, determined. Amina carried the lullaby, the memory of the queen's vindication and sorrow. Tano carried the lost echoes of his mother's love. Together they would finish sewing the spell of protection, rooting it in truth and carrying it forward back to the kingdom. As they walked, the forest blossomed around them. Wildflowers unfurled in the shadows. Birds sang notes that echoed the melody. The trees glowed faintly at their roots. In that moment, Amina felt both small and infinite, a single thread tying together hearts and destinies, past and future. Tears slid down her cheeks. "Let's finish this," she said. Tano squeezed her hand. "Together." And somewhere in the forest, where the queen's spirit lingered in the rustle of leaves, a memory settled into the soil, ready to grow anew. The palace gates loomed before them in the muted pale of dawn, tall and carved with decades of history. Snow-white marble columns caught the first rays of light, and the scent of fresh blooms from the royal garden drifted through the air. But for Amina, the grandeur only heightened the sense of displacement. She straightened her borrowed cloak, hands trembling as Tano led her forward. Soldiers, servants and courtiers lined the avenue, bows lowered, whispers crackling like static in the crisp morning air. Tano strode beside her, his posture steady, a silent shield against the murmurs and sidelong glances. Amina kept her eyes on the ground, afraid to meet their gazes, yet she felt every stare, every lingering suspicion. Tales of missing royals and forest curses had traveled far, woven into rumors. Now those rumors walked beside the prince. When they crossed the threshold, the hush turned into a rippling wave of reaction. Noblewomen paused mid-leap in their gowns, perfumed air thick with surprise. Guards stiffened, bellboys stopped polishing the marble floors. Musicians playing in the hall halted their tune. At the top of the grand staircase, Tano's father, King Rafi, stood tall, robes trailing behind him. His face was impassive, though his eyes flitted with confusion and perhaps something else, something unspoken. Tano moved forward, breaking the stiff tension. "Father," he said, voice steady and clear. The king inclined his head slightly. "Tano." Amina didn't speak yet, just followed Tano's lead. He stepped forward and brushed imaginary dust from her cloak. She looked up at him in surprise. He offered her a gentle nod, a gesture of reassurance. She met his gaze, drawing a steadiness from his presence that she didn't know was possible. The nobles surrounded them like a tide coming in. One of them cleared her throat, flanked by two heralds. A brass trumpet bellowed and their voices rose, courtly, cautious. "Your Majesty, the prince returns from the forest, not alone," said the herald woman, voice threaded with elegance and suspicion. Her eyes fell on Amina. "This woman?" A murmur rose from the crowd. Some moved closer, others stepped away. Tano placed himself between them and Amina. "She is not your enemy." A stronger voice from the assembly barked. "A jumper, a woods witch." Another added, "She's a captive of spirits." Panic veiled as disdain. Amina's pulse hammered, but Tano's voice remained calm. "She is no witch. She helped me find my mother's truth. But she is not royal, she is peasant and from the woods." The courtiers' voices grew like blades spinning. The color of their resentment was clear. Tano lifted his chin. "I bring her as witness. Without her we cannot free ourselves from years of loss, of hidden sins. Without the melody she carries, the lullaby will end as a curse, not a protection." A hush fell. The courtiers still simmered with anger, but curiosity glimmered beneath their hostility. Some leaned in, others recoiled. Then King Rafi spoke. His voice was cold, measured, cautious. "Is this a ploy, Tano? A court trick? Or have you breathed forest smoke into palace loyalties?" Tano stepped forward. "Father, I love you. But if you cared, you'd hear me. We return with proof of what was stolen from us." He looked at Amina. "Where is the song, Amina?" At first she didn't answer. Her voice had never been used in such a place. But Tano's gaze coaxed her forward and she nodded. She stepped out, heart pounding in the hush. She began to hum. At first a quiver, then stronger, notes that rose like incense in the air. Courtiers held their breath. Guards straightened as though in attention. The lullaby wove through the columns, crept along the marble steps, climbed the vaulted ceiling, spun in echoes like silk threads connecting every ear. King Rafi's face paled. His eyes shimmered. Amina found herself singing fully, no longer just the melody, but the words she didn't know she carried. Words of motherly love, protection, and ancient truth. The magic in the tune became visible, tiny motes of glowing silver weaving in the air, drifting down like petals from an unseen tree. Tano closed his eyes and held her hand. When the lullaby ended, sound collapsed into stillness. The hush deepened, heavier than before. King Rafi stood frozen. Tano squeezed Amina's hand gently. The king's gaze shifted to him, then to Amina, then back again. His voice cracked. "Play it again," he rasped. Amina opened her mouth once more. She began again. This time the king stepped forward, cradling his cheek as tears broke free. His son's face softened, not as a prince but as a son he had failed. Courtiers gasped. Some gasped then bowed their heads, shaken beyond usual courtly composure. Amina's voice trembled. But Tano's presence beside her lent strength. The melody continued to weave. When she finished again, the hush held a different note: warmth, empathy, curiosity. Court sentiment shifted like a breath of wind. The nobles no longer saw a forest witch, they saw a healer. Someone who opened old wounds to heal them. King Rafi recovered composure slowly, dignity intact but transformed. "My son," he said, voice low, thick with emotion. "I did not believe." He stared at Amina. "But I hear. I see." He took a step toward her. "You carry my wife's gift." Amina knelt slowly. "Your Majesty, I am not royal blood. But I carry truth." The court gasped. It was unexpected. They were stepping into a story not yet finished, and the ground felt unstable. Tano knelt too. "Father, this truth can heal, or destroy." The king rested a gentle hand on Amina's shoulder. "Rise," he said quietly. The court parted as they both rose. His eyes filled once more. "Let the queen song live again. Let the houses rebuild from honesty." A noblewoman wiped her eyes. Another grasped her husband's arm. Tano caught Amina's wrist, gave a small reassuring squeeze. She nodded. They had done it, not with swords, not with power, but with a song. That evening, late after the court had emptied and candles cooled, King Rafi stayed behind. He walked through the deserted halls, each step echoing in quiet corridors. He paused before a portrait of his late queen, painted gown shimmering with silver leaf, her eyes kind, loving. He closed his eyes and let tears fall. He imagined her humming the lullaby beside young Tano. He could almost smell her perfume. Forgiveness rustled like a leaf in his heart. The song had opened a door, and now he wept in the presence of her memory and his son. When Tano found him before dawn, his father looked worn but alive. He reached out. "Son, we have much to repair." Tano took his hand. "We will start with truth." And together father and son stepped toward a new dawn, for palace, people and song. The palace courtyard filled quickly with murmurs and curious eyes as word spread about the trial. The nobles were determined to end the unsettling talk once and for all. Amina stood at the center of the great stone circle, framed by towering columns and the expectant faces of the kingdom's elite. The air was thick with suspicion and thinly veiled hostility. Many whispered she was nothing but a charlatan, a mere peasant with a borrowed tale. The judge, a stern-faced elder with silver hair and sharp eyes, cleared his throat. "Amina of the forest," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "You claim to carry the lullaby of our late queen, a song lost for decades. If this be true, let it be proven here in the presence of all." Amina's heart pounded, but she nodded. She stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, clutching the thread and bone charm she wore in her hair. The crowd held its breath, some with scorn, others with a flicker of hope. She began to sing, softly at first, the melody rising like mist curling over the river in dawn's early light. The notes stretched through the courtyard, delicate and pure, carrying centuries of love, loss, and protection. The nobles' faces tightened, some exchanging uneasy glances, others scoffing under their breath. But as her voice grew stronger, the sky above the palace shifted. Dark clouds swirled unnaturally, and a chill wind swept through the stone halls and open windows. Birds erupted from the nearby trees, their cries piercing and wild. Whispers turned to gasps. Courtiers clutched their cloaks tighter as the wind seemed to carry a voice beyond Amina's own. Suddenly, shimmering before them, the ghostly figure of the queen appeared, draped in flowing blue robes that seemed woven from water and moonlight. Her eyes, full of sorrow and resolve, scanned the crowd before resting on her son, the prince, and then on Amina. The nobles staggered back, some collapsing to the ground, overwhelmed by the undeniable presence of the spirit. Amina's song wove around the apparition, binding past and present, truth and hope. The queen's lips moved silently, echoing the lullaby's words in a language lost to time but felt deeply in every heart. The trial, meant to silence Amina, instead laid bare the kingdom's hidden wounds. The wind howled through the corridors, a fierce reminder that nature and spirit would not be silenced by doubt or fear. The nobles' accusations faltered, replaced by awe and trembling respect. The queen's ghost faded slowly, leaving behind a shimmering trace that settled like dew on the prince's shoulders. The skies cleared, and an uneasy peace settled over the courtyard. The trial had not discredited Amina, it had revealed the undeniable truth. The echoes of the queen's apparition lingered long after the skies cleared, casting a new light on the palace halls. Whispers became voices, voices became accusations, and the long-buried secrets clawed their way to the surface. The trial that had begun as a farce soon turned into a reckoning. It didn't take long for the truth to unravel. The schemers behind the curtain emerged from the shadows. Amina's own uncle, a cold man driven by greed and hatred, and a faction of nobles who feared the queen's power would threaten their grip on the kingdom. Their plots to silence the lullaby and maintain control now lay exposed, like rotting roots torn from the earth. Tano's father, the king, could no longer hide behind his regal mask. His pride was shattered as he faced the consequences of his silence and inaction. In a rare public confession, he abdicated his throne, overwhelmed by shame and regret for the years of loss and suffering his family and kingdom had endured. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on him, and he stepped down, hoping the future might heal what he could not. In the midst of this upheaval, Amina found herself at the heart of the kingdom's renewal. The council offered her a place as royal seer, the spiritual keeper of the lullaby's power and the queen's legacy. It was a role of great honor but also great responsibility, one that came with expectations to guide the people and safeguard their connection to the past. Yet Amina surprised them all. She did not ask for titles or power. Her only desire was peace, peace for herself, for the village that had cast her out, and for the kingdom that had forgotten its own soul. She wanted the wounds to heal quietly without more blood or bitterness. Tano, standing by her side through it all, knew that peace alone was not enough for the woman who had survived betrayal and the forest's cruel embrace. With quiet strength, he offered her more than a title or duty, he offered his heart. Their shared song, once lost to sorrow and silence, now blossomed into a promise of hope and unity. In that moment the palace felt different, lighter, as if the very walls had exhaled centuries of grief. Truth had echoed like music through the halls, carrying with it the power to heal and transform. And as Amina and Tano faced the future together, the kingdom began to remember how to live again, guided by the song of a love born from darkness but destined to shine.